So we're reading today on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 5, text number 6. When the living entity is covered by the mode of ignorance, he does not understand the individual living being and the supreme living being, and his mind is subjugated to fruitive activity. Therefore, until one has love for Lord Vasudeva, who is none other than myself, he is certainly not delivered from having to accept a material body again and again. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When the mind is polluted by fruitive activity, the living entity wants to be elevated from one material position to another. Generally, everyone is involved in working hard day and night to improve his economic condition. Even when one understands the Vedic rituals, he becomes interested in promotion to heavenly planets, not knowing that one's real interest lies in returning home back to Godhead. By acting on a platform of fruitive activity, one wanders throughout the universe in different species and forms. Unless he comes in contact with a devotee of the Lord, a guru, he does not become attached to the service of Lord Vasudeva. Knowledge of Vasudeva requires many births to understand. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 7:19, Vasudeva Savamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha. After struggling for existence for many births, one may take shelter at the lotus feet of Vasudeva Krishna. When this happens, one actually becomes wise and surrenders unto him. That is the only way to stop the repetition of birth and death. This is confirmed in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Madhya 19:151, in the instructions given by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Srila Rupa Goswami at Dasa Vameda Gata. Brahmanda Ramite Kona Bhagavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasad He Paya Bhakti Lata Bija. The living entity wanders throughout different planets in different forms and bodies. But if by chance he comes in contact with a bona fide spiritual master, by the grace of the spiritual master, he receives Lord Krishna's shelter and his devotional life begins. Okay. Ramanda Brahmite Kona Bhagavan Jiva Guru Krishna Prasadi Paya Bhakti Lata Bija. The living entity wanders throughout different planets in different forms and bodies, but if by chance he comes in contact with a bona fide spiritual master, by the grace of the spiritual master, he receives Lord Krishna's shelter and his devotional life begins. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, who is our spiritual master. Text number 7. Even though one may be very learned and wise, he is mad if he does not understand that the endeavor for sense gratification is a useless waste of time. Being forgetful of his own interests, he tries to be happy in the material world. Centering his interests around his home, which is based on sexual intercourse, and which brings him all kinds of material miseries. In this way, one is no better than a foolish animal. Wow. In the purport by Srila Prabhupada, in the lowest stage of devotional life, one is not an unavoided devotee. That means that one may have other, let's say, prerogatives that are not related to Krishna consciousness. Anya vilasita sunyam jnana karmadi anavritam. To be an unalloyed devotee, one must be free from all material desires and untouched by fruitive activity. And speculative knowledge. On the lower platform, one may sometimes be interested in philosophical speculation with a tinge of devotion. However, at that stage, one is still interested in sense gratification and is contaminated by the modes of material nature. The influence of Maya is so strong that even a person advanced in knowledge actually forgets that he is Krishna's eternal servant. Therefore, he remains satisfied in his household life, which is centered around sexual intercourse. Conceding to a life of sex, he agrees to suffer all kinds of material miseries. Due to ignorance, one is thus bound by the chain of material laws. Okay, and over and over, Prabhupada in his purports is making it clear that illicit sex, or even illicit sex or illicit sex, is not actually good for anyone. It's best to give it up completely. Yeah, one may have sex to have 1, 2, 3 children, maybe 4 children, but after that, they should give it up completely and be totally surrendered to Krishna, chanting, dancing, feasting, and so forth, and not have any attraction anymore to sex life. And there's, and absolutely, it says, conceding to a life of sex, one agrees to suffer all kinds of material miseries. Due to ignorance, one is thus bound by the chain of material laws. So, give it up. That way, you will have a spiritual life. As long as we remain chained, and that's the word that's been used here, chained in the chain of material laws, bound by the chain of material laws, we will be in ignorance and will not be able to function in Krishna consciousness uh, hardly at all. Text 8. This is a very nice verse. Pumsa striya maituni bhavan etam tayor mito hridaya grantim ahu ato griha shetra sutapta vitar janasya mohayam aham mameti. It's a uh, very prominent verse. The attraction between male and female is the basic principle of material existence. On the basis of this misconception, which ties together the hearts of the male and female, one becomes attracted to his body, home, property, children, relatives, and wealth. In this way, one increases his illusions and thinks in terms of I and mine. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. It's a very good, very important verse, a very famous verse. Purport. Sex serves as the natural attraction between man and woman. And when they are married, their relationship becomes more involved. Due to the entangling relationship between man and woman, there is a sense of illusion, uh, whereby one thinks, this man is my husband, or this woman is my wife. This is called Hridaya Granthi, the hard knot in the heart. This knot is very difficult to undo, even though man and woman separate, either for the principles of Varnashrama or simply to get a divorce. Well, in any case, the man always thinks of the woman, and the woman always thinks of the man. Thus, a person becomes materially attached to family, property, and children. Although all these are temporary, the possessor unfortunately identifies with his property and wealth. Sometimes, even after renunciation, one becomes attached to a temple or to a few things that constitute the property of a sannyasi. But such attachment is not as strong as family attachment. The attachment to the family is the strongest illusion. In the Satya Samhita, it is stated, Brahmadya Yajna Valkad Yajna Valkadya Muchante Sri Sahayina Bodhyante Ke Chan Etesam Vyesham Cha Vido Vidu. Sometimes it is found among exalted personalities like Lord that the wife and children are not a cause of bondage. Well, that's good. On the contrary, the wife actually helps further spiritual life and liberation. Nonetheless, most people are bound by the knots of the marital relationship, and consequently, they forget their relationship with Krishna. Okay, that's uh, text 9. When the strong knot in the heart of a person implicated in material life due to the results of past action is slackened, one turns away from his attachment to home, wife, children. In this way, one gives up the basic principle of illusion, meaning I and mine, and becomes liberated. Thus, one goes to the transcendental world. Okay, well, you have to give up the basic principle of illusion, which is I and mine. Everything belongs to Krishna, nothing belongs to me. But everything should be used in Krishna's service. Purport. When by associating with sadhus and engaging in devotional service, one is gradually freed from the material conception due to knowledge, practice, and detachment. There it is. Knowledge, practice, and detachment. The knot of attachment in the heart is slackened. Thus, one can get freed from conditional life and become eligible to return home back to Godhead. So there's this hard knot of attachment in the heart. But by the knowledge, practice, and detachment, the knot of attachment in the heart is slackened. That's what we need in order to become Krishna conscious. Okay. Text number 10 to 13. Oh, my sons, you should accept the highly elevated Paramahansa, a spiritually advanced spiritual master. In this way, you should place your faith and love in me, the Supreme Personality of God. You should detest sense gratification and tolerate the duality of pleasure and pain. Wow, that's a nice statement. Detest sense gratification and tolerate the duality of pleasure and pain, which are like the seasonal changes of summer and winter. Try to realize the miserable condition of living entities who are miserable even in the higher planetary systems. Philosophically inquire about the truth, then undergo all kinds of austerities and penances for the sake of devotional service. Give up the endeavor for sense enjoyment and engage in the service of the Lord. Listen to discussions about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and always associate with devotees. Chant about and glorify the Supreme Lord. And look upon everyone equally on the spiritual platform. Give up enmity and subdue anger and lamentation. Abandon identifying the self with the body and the home. And practice reading the revealed scriptures. Live in a secluded place. Practice the process by which you can completely control your life air, mind, and senses. Have full faith in the revealed scriptures, the Vedic literatures, and always observe celibacy. Perform your prescribed duties and avoid unnecessary talk. Always thinking of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, acquire knowledge from the right source. Thus, practicing bhakti yoga, you will patiently and enthusiastically be elevated in knowledge and will be able to give up the false ego. Wow, what a wonderful verse that is. That is uh, actually Canto 5, Chapter 5, text 10 to 13. There's a full, let's say, expose of what it means to be a devotee. So, what does it mean? One must undergo all kinds of austerities and penances for the sake of devotional service. Give up the endeavor for sense enjoyment and engage in the service of the Lord. Listen to discussions about the Supreme Personality of Godhead and always associate with devotees. Chant about and glorify the Supreme Lord and look upon everyone equally on the spiritual platform. Give up enmity and subdue anger and lamentation. Abandon identifying the self with the body and the home, and practice reading the revealed scriptures. Live in a secluded place and practice the process by which you can completely control your life air, mind, and senses. Have full faith in the revealed scriptures, the Vedic literatures, and always observe celibacy, meaning no sex at all. Perform your prescribed duties and avoid unnecessary talks, always thinking of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Acquire knowledge from the right source. That means from genuine Vaishnavas. Thus, practicing bhakti yoga, you will patiently and enthusiastically be elevated in knowledge and will be able to give up the false ego. Wow, what a wonderful verse that is. That is actually three verses. Canto 5, Chapter 5, text 10 to 13. Purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In these four verses, Rishabhadeva tells his sons how they can be freed from the false identification arising from false ego and material conditional life. One gradually becomes liberated by practicing, as mentioned above. All of these prescribed methods enable one to give up the material body, lingam vyapohet, and be situated in his original spiritual body. First of all, one has to accept a bona fide spiritual master. This is advocated by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Shri Guru Padasraya. To be freed from entanglement of the material world, one has to approach a spiritual master. Tad vignanartam sagurum eva vigachet. By questioning the spiritual master and by serving him, one can advance in spiritual life. When one engages in devotional service, naturally the attraction for personal comfort, for eating, sleeping, and dressing is reduced. By associating with the devotee, a spiritual standard is maintained. The word Mad Deva Sangat is very important. There are many so-called religions devoted to the worship of various demigods. But here, good association means association with one who simply accepts Krishna as his worshipable deity. Yeah, in other words, it's not necessary at all to worship demigods. Another important item is Dvandva Titiksha. As long as one is situated in the material world, there must be pleasure and pain arising from the material body. As Krishna advises in Bhagavad Gita, Tam Satikshasvas Bharata, one has to learn how to tolerate the temporary pains and pleasures of this material world. One must be detached from his family and practice celibacy. There it is. Sex with one's wife, according to the scriptural injunctions, is also accepted as brahmacharya celibacy. In other words, let's read that again. Sex with one's wife, according to the scriptural injunctions, is also accepted as brahmacharya celibacy. But illicit sex is opposed to religious principles, and it hampers advancement in spiritual consciousness. Another important word is vijnana virajita. Everything should be done very scientifically and consciously. One should be a realized soul. In this way, one can give up the entanglement of material bondage. Sri Madhvacharya points out the sum and substance of these four slokas is that one should refrain from acting out of desire for sense gratification and should instead always engage in the Lord's loving service. In other words, Bhakti Yoga is the acknowledged path of liberation. Srila Madhvacharya quotes from the Adhyatma from the Adhyatma, I guess, Shastra. Atmano vihitam karma varjayit vanya karmana kamasya cha parityago nirihiti ahur uttama. One should perform activities only for the benefit of the soul. Any other activity should be given up. When a person is situated in this way, he is said to be desireless. Actually, a living entity cannot be totally desireless, but when he desires the benefit of the soul and nothing else, he is said to be desireless. That's a very nice statement. Let me read that again. Actually, a living entity cannot be totally desireless. Yeah, of course. If you're completely desireless, you're not a person anymore. You're just an it. However, uh, one should be uh, involved. One should be. Uh, one cannot be totally desireless. That means you wouldn't be desireless for Krishna. You have some desires, but those desires should be to serve the Lord and not serve one's sense gratification. But when the desires when he desires the benefit of the soul and nothing else, he is said to be desireless. There it is. That's the main point. Spiritual knowledge is jnana vijnana samanvitam. When one is fully equipped with jnana, meaning knowledge, and vijnana, meaning realized knowledge, he is perfect. So jnana is theoretical knowledge, vijnana is matured understanding of knowledge. Then, by vijnana, he is perfect. Jnana means that one understands the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, to be the Supreme Being. Vijnana means, Vijnana refers to the activities that liberate one from the ignorance of material existence. So, jnana is like theoretical knowledge, and vijnana is like fully understanding
Realization.
knowledge.
Realize it.
You fully realize that. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 2.9.31, Jnanam Parama Guyam Meyad Vijnana Samanvitam. Knowledge of the Supreme Lord is very confidential, and the supreme knowledge by which one understands him furthers the liberation of all living entities. Knowledge of the Supreme Lord is very confidential, and the supreme knowledge by which one understands him furthers the liberation of all living entities. This knowledge is the vijnana, mature knowledge of the Lord. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 4.9, Jnana karma chame divyam evam yo veti tattva Jakvadeham punarjanma naitimam iti sarjana. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activity does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. That means that we have to have transcendental knowledge of who Krishna is and how to please Krishna and engage in his devotional service. Otherwise, will not be able to remember Krishna at the moment of death, and will continue in the throes of Maya, or the what you would call um, what is that? Be locked up, uh, um, be locked up in Maya. Text 14. As I have advised, my dear sons, you should act accordingly. Be very careful. By these means, you will be freed from the ignorance of the desire for fruitive activity and the knot of bondage in the heart will be completely severed. For further advancement, you should always give up the means. That is, you should not become attached to the process of liberation itself. Yeah, we should not even desire liberation. We should desire uh, devotional service, whether in the material world or the spiritual world. It's the same thing. So that means that our only desire is to continue devotional service. It doesn't matter where that happens. Purport. Now, I mean, somebody might say, "Well, I can only do devotional service, when I'm liberated." Well, no, you can do devotional service in any condition of life. The process of liberation is Brahma Jigyasa, the search for the absolute truth. Generally, Brahma Jigyasa is called neti neti, meaning the truth is not this and not that. The process by which one analyzes existence to search out the absolute truth. This method continues as long as one is not situated in his spiritual life. Yeah, he could go on eternally saying, "Oh, the truth is not this, is not that." But that's not going to lead you to what the truth is. Spiritual life is Brahmabhuta, the self-realized state. In the words of Bhagavad Gita 1854. Brahmabhuta prasanatma nasachati nakamsati samaksarve sabhutesu mad bhaktin bhaktite param. One who is thus transcendentally situated at once realizes the supreme Brahman, meaning Krishna, and becomes fully joyful. He never laments nor desires to have anything. He is equally disposed to every living entity. In that state, he attains pure devotional service unto me. The idea is to enter into the para bhakti, the transcendental devotional service of the Supreme Lord. Not mundane service, but transcendental devotional service. To attain this, wait a minute. Mundane service would be like doing altruistic uh, uh, things. Uh, so many people get involved in mundane, altruistic endeavors. Like they go out in the streets and they, have placards, and they are supporting a certain type of activity, or they are, uh, um, uh, in other words, they're engaged in supporting some type of mundane activity. So a devotee stays away from that type of association. Yeah, people will go and they will have placards, and they are uh, supporting some type of person, or some type of behavior, and rejecting other types of behavior, or other personalities. So the idea is to enter into the parabhakti, the transcendental devotional service of the Supreme Lord. To attain this, one must analyze one's existence. But when one is actually engaged in devotional service, he should not bother seeking out knowledge. By simply engaging in devotional service, undeviatingly, one will always remain in the liberated condition. Yeah, I mean, one who is highly educated and is always engaged in mundane knowledge, if you ask him a question, he will not be able to always answer in a direct way. He'll say, well, so and so says this, and this other philosopher says that, and my grandmother said this. So they never give you a clear explanation of what is the absolute truth. They know a lot of things without knowing the essential things that are most important. But simply engaging in devotional service, by simply engaging in devotional service, undeviatingly, one will always remain in the liberated condition. So that's the position of the devotee. Mam sayo vibhicharana, bhakti yogena sevate, saganam samatityaita, brahmabhuyaya kalpate. Bhagavad Gita 14:26. The unflinching execution of devotional service is in itself Brahmabhuta, meaning its liberated state. Another important feature in this connection is Anena Yogena Yato Padesham. The instructions received from the spiritual master must be followed immediately. Wow, look at that. Immediately. One should not deviate from the surface. One should not should not deviate from or surpass the instructions of the spiritual master. Yeah, one should always be subordinate to the spiritual master. One should not think, oh, now I know as much or more than my spiritual master. One should not be simply intent on consulting books, but should simultaneously execute the spiritual master's order. Yato Padeshan. Mystic power should be achieved to enable one to give up the material conception. But when one actually engages in devotional service, one does not need to practice the mystic yoga system. The point is that one can give up the practice of yoga, but devotional service cannot be given up. As stated in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.7.10, Atmaramas Chamunayo Nirganta Api Urukrame Purvanti Ahaitukrim Bhaktim Ittiham Tuta Guno Hari. Even those who are liberated, the Atmaramas, must always engage in devotional service. One may give up the practice of yoga when one is self-realized, but at no stage can one give up devotional service. All other activities for self-realization, including yoga and philosophical speculation, may be given up, but devotional service must be retained at all times. Harivilas. Text 15. If one is serious about going back home, back to Godhead, he must consider the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The summum bonum and chief aim of life. A summum bonum means the highest level of spiritual knowledge and achievement. So, one must consider the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yeah, it's not that I know this, I know that. One must also consider the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the chief aim of life. If he is a father instructing his sons, a spiritual master instructing his disciples, or a king instructing his citizens, he must instruct them as I have advised. I mean Krishna and his advice. That means your Vedic knowledge. Without being angry, he should continue giving instructions, even if his disciple, son, or citizen is sometimes unable to follow his order. Ignorant people who engage in pious and impious activities should be engaged in devotional service by all means. They should always avoid fruitive activity. If one puts into the if one puts into the bondage of karmic activity his disciple, son, or citizen who is bereft of transcendental vision, how will one profit? It is like leading a blind man into a dark well and causing him to fall in. Yes, in other words, the spiritual master should not engage the disciple in mundane activities and mislead the devotee. The guru should always act on the highest standard of Krishna consciousness and teach that to his disciples. It is stated in Bhagavad Gita 3:26, Na buddhi vedam janayat ajnanam karma sanginam josayat sarvakarmani vidvan yukta samacharan. Let not wise disrupt the minds, let not the wise disrupt the minds of the ignorant, who are attached to fruitive action. They should be encouraged not to refrain from work, but to work in the spirit of devotion. So you don't want people to become lazy bums and don't do anything spiritual. Uh, you should inspire people to give up that lethargic behavior and take up Krishna consciousness. But you shouldn't, it says, let not the wise disrupt the minds of the ignorant. That means don't inspire them to do nothing on the path of spiritual life. Uh, Inspire them to do something for Krishna. So let not the wise disrupt the minds of the ignorant who are attached to fruitive action. They should be encouraged not to refrain from work, but to work in the spirit of devotion. Well, there has to be an example of that. That's what the devotee is. He gives an example of not being lazy and rejecting all types of possibilities to make spiritual life, the spiritual advancement, but to, in other words, not to refrain from work, but to work in the spirit of devotion. So instead of working for sense gratification, they should work for the spirit of devotion. But they should not in any way, become a lazy bum and not do anything. Text number 16. Due to ignorance, the materialistic person does not know anything about his real self-interest. The auspicious path in life, he is simply bound to material enjoyment by lusty desires. In other words, it doesn't say by lusty actions, it means lusty desires. He may have engage in lusty actions, but at some point he may no longer be able to engage in lusty actions, but still the lusty desires remain in his mind. And all his plans are made for this purpose. For temporary sense gratification, such a person creates a society of envy. And due to his mentality, he plunges into the ocean of suffering. Such a foolish person does not even know about this. So when one becomes envious of someone else, they really lose their ability to be Krishna conscious. One should be always a well-wisher. One should never be envious of anyone. Let's see what Prabhupada says now. Purport. The word Nasta Dristi, meaning one who has no eyes to see the future, is very significant in this verse. Life goes on from one body to another, and the activities performed in this life are enjoyed or suffered in the next life, if not later in this life. One who is unintelligent, who has no eyes to see the future, simply creates enmity and fights with others for sense gratification. A lot of people like that. As a result, one suffers in the next life. But due to being like a blind man, he continues to act in such a way that he suffers unlimitedly. Oh, well, that's hell. Such a person is a Muda, one who simply wastes his time and does not understand the Lord's devotional service. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 7.25, Naham prakasasarvasya yogamaya samangrita mudo yam vijanati loko mam ajam abhiyam. I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, I am covered by my eternal creative potency, yogamaya. And so the deluded world knows me not, who am unborn and infallible. In the Katha Upanishad, it is also said, Avidya yam antare vartamana swayam dira panditam manya mana. Although ignorant, people still go to other blind men for leadership. As a result, both are subjected to miserable conditions. The blind lead the blind into the ditch. Oh my God. So, if you're going to go to someone, you should go to someone like Srila Prabhupada, who is completely surrendered to Krishna and is only speaking about Krishna, not interested in all the other mundane things that people talk about. Yeah, that was Prabhupada. He was always talking about Krishna. He wasn't talking about anything mundane. He would always explain how to engage in devotional service and always in encouraging his devotees to engage in devotional service without any selfish motives. And text number 17. If someone is ignorant and addicted to the path of samsara, meaning continual birth and death, how can one who is actually learned, merciful, and advanced in spiritual knowledge engage him in fruitive activity and thus further entangle him in material existence? Very good question. If a blind man is walking down the wrong path, how can a gentleman allow him to continue in this way to danger? Very good rhetorical question. How can he approve this method? No wise or kind man can allow this.
Very bold.
Yeah, so we should not be engaged in uh, bogus activities, such as being part of, let's say, uh, a an organization that is only interested in helping the material body, but not the soul. There are plenty of organizations like that. They only are talking about the material welfare of people and not the spiritual welfare of people. Text 18. This is a very famous verse. It says, one who cannot deliver his dependents from the path of repeated birth and death should never become a spiritual master, a father, a husband, a mother, or a worshipable demigod. This is a very famous verse. There are many spiritual masters, but Rishaba advises that one should not become a spiritual master if he is unable to save his disciple from the path of birth and death. Unless one is a pure devotee of Krishna, he cannot save himself from the path of repeated birth and death. Chakwadeham punarjanma naiti mam eti sarjana. One can stop birth and death only by returning home, back to Godhead. However, who can go back to Godhead unless he understands the Supreme Lord in truth? Janma karma chime divyam evam yo veti tattva. We have many instances in history illustrating Rishabha Deva's instruction. Sukracharya was rejected by Bali Maharaj due to his inability to save Bali Maharaj from the path of repeated birth and death. Sukracharya was not a pure devotee. He was more or less inclined to fruitive activity, and he objected when Bali Maharaj promised to give everything to Lord Vishnu. So why did Sukracharya do that? Well, he said, look, if you give everything to Krishna, you won't give me anything. But I need your material benefits to maintain my family, get my daughter married, and this and that. So he wasn't thinking, Sukracharya wasn't really thinking about helping his disciple. He was thinking about exploiting the disciple for sense gratification. Actually, one is supposed to give everything to the Lord because everything belongs to the Lord. Consequently, the Supreme Lord advises in Bhagavad Gita 9:27, Yat kurosi yadasnasi, yat jahosi dadasi yat, yat tapasya sikonteya, tat kurusva madarpana. It's a beautiful verse. O son of Kunti, all that you do, all that you eat, all that you offer and give away, as well as all austerities that you may perform, should be done as an offering to me. Me meaning Krishna. This is bhakti. Unless one is devoted, he cannot give everything to the Supreme Lord. Unless one can do so, he cannot become a spiritual master. In other words, giving everything to the Lord. He must give everything to the Lord. If he can't do that, then he should not become a spiritual master, even a husband, a father, or mother. Similarly, the wives of the Brahmanas who were performing sacrifices gave up their relatives just to satisfy Krishna. This is an example of a wife rejecting a husband who cannot deliver her from the impending dangers of birth and death. Similarly, Prahlad Maharaja rejected his father, and Bharata Maharaj rejected his mother Janani nasasyat. The word Daivam indicates a demigod or one who accepts worship from a dependent. Ordinarily, the spiritual master, husband, father, mother, or superior relative accepts worship from an inferior relative. But here, Rishabha Deva forbids this. First, the father, spiritual master, or husband must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself in the ocean of reproachment for his unlawful activities. In other words, he's going to suffer.
Wow.
The guru is going to suffer. Everyone should be very responsible and take charge of his dependent, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple, or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. Well, yeah, the guru has a big, huge responsibility of liberating his disciple from the cycle of birth and death. But if the guru himself is not liberated, how is he going to do it? Yes.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. If a father or a mother, if they are also not giving the right knowledge to their kids and not helping them get out of the cycle of birth and death, then it says that they are doing unlawful activities, Maharaj, in that case. So they'll be subject to more bad karma.
Yes, definitely. How can a real mother or father lead the child in the wrong direction? But there are many mothers and fathers that lead their kids in the wrong direction, unfortunately. For them, it's not wrong because they're saying, well, what do you mean? I mean,
Yeah.
I want my kid to have, a good job and a good education and have a good wife and have good food on the table and this and that, all mundane things. No question of tapasya, no question of dedicating one's life to Krishna.
But they're doing that unknowingly, Maharaj. They want to help their kids, but without the right knowledge, they are helping them in the wrong direction.
Oh, that is very sad.
Yeah.
Very, very sad. That's why it says, first the father, spiritual master, or husband, or wife, must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself in the ocean of reproachment, meaning he'll be
Repercussions.
He'll be
Punish.
people will consider him to be a phony person and will criticize him.
Yeah. Disapproval, rebuke.
Right. He plunges himself in the ocean of reproachment for his unlawful activities. Everyone should be very responsible and take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death.
So, Maharaj, family of multiple kids, not everybody, let's say, follows your instructions, and even though you are trying to guide them in the right way. So what happens in those cases? Even if one child is like, even for Prabhupada himself, all his children did not follow. So what does this mean? Like, how does this apply to a person? Is it a best efforts? Is it a...
Well, let's put it like this. Nobody is an expert in his home.
Hare Krishna.
But that's why you have to have a bona fide spiritual master. And the bona fide spiritual master will educate the devotee on how to live properly. Even if somebody is married, there's a proper way of behavior in Krishna consciousness. So it doesn't matter whether one is married or not married. If one follows Krishna consciousness, they'll be able to overcome all the pitfalls of material life.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Yeah.
Does this mean even if your father or mother are spiritually inclined and are teaching you the right things, the children should have their own spiritual master?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Once they get to
Just
certain.
like Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he told, his son to get initiated by Guru Babaji. And when he wasn't able to be accepted by Guru Babaji, the father said, "You go back and get initiated by him. Don't come back to me anymore if you don't get initiated." Right. So it's very important to have a bona fide spiritual master. And that's why it says, ordinarily, the spiritual master, husband, father, mother, or superior relative, accepts worship from an inferior relative. But here, Rishabhadeva forbids this. First, the father, spiritual master or husband, must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself in the ocean of reproachment, meaning criticism, for his unlawful activity. Everyone should be very responsible and take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple, or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. Well, the only way you can do that is to teach your dependents to be Krishna conscious and to follow strictly the rules and regulations of Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, simply because you can make sure that they are well fed, that they go to a good university, that they get married, all those things are not exactly the right, let's say, path. The right path is that one, first of all, becomes a genuine devotee. Then all those other things they can do to have an honest living. But it's not meant for sense gratification. This is the thing that separates the men from the boys. The real men, they first are qualified as a devotee, and then they engage in the activities of maintaining a family, etc. But if one is only maintaining a family without any Krishna consciousness, they're a complete failure as a mother, as a father, as a friend, or as anything. It's a complete failure because they've missed the boat of being Krishna conscious. So it says here, and it's very, very profound, everyone should be very responsible and take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple. Well, it means that they have to act like actual devotees. Or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. So, that means that a mother and father or a guru has to be bona fide and be able to save their dependents from repeated birth and death. That's a big responsibility. Therefore, one should not even get married if they're not capable of saving their dependents from birth and death. Otherwise, you're going to mislead people. You're going to teach them to have a mundane life, and therefore you have misled them, and then you're going to suffer, as well as the other person is going to suffer. Therefore, it says, similarly, Prahlad Maharaj rejected his father, and Bharat Maharaj rejected his mother. Janani Nasasya. The word Daivam indicates a demigod or one who accepts worship from a dependent. Ordinarily, the spiritual master, father, or husband, father, mother, or superior relative accepts worship from an inferior relative. But here, Rishabha forbids this. First, the father, spiritual master, or husband must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and deaths. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself into the ocean of reproachment, being very, very criticized for his unlawful activities. Whatever his unlawful activities, he's not directing his subordinates in the right direction. What is the right direction? Complete surrender to Guru and Krishna. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. So, one should not be a mother, one should not be a father, one should not be a guru, one should not be someone who's giving advice to others, unless they can liberate someone from the cycle of birth and death. So it's a big responsibility to be a mother and father. Big, big responsibility. It's not simply putting food on the table or having the money to put your child through good education or material education. No, you have to be able to liberate your dependents from the cycle of birth and death. And it says here, first, the father, spiritual master or husband, must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself in the ocean of reproachment, meaning he'll be criticized severely for his unlawful activities. I like that, the ocean of reproachment. If only Prabhupada can write like this. The ocean of reproachment. Yeah, it's just like, a husband who has not been acting properly, his wife puts him in the ocean of reproachments. So criticize him up and down all the time. And it becomes hellish for the husband who has not acted properly. So first, the father, spiritual master, or husband must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself into the ocean of reproachment for his unlawful activities. Everyone should be very responsible and take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple, or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. These are very profound statements by Prabhupada. We should think about this very seriously. If he cannot, and so it says, first the father, spiritual master, husband, must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. Well, how do you do that? You have to teach your dependents to be Krishna conscious in all situations and give up sense gratification. If you can't do that, then you are misleading and you're not actually a bona fide teacher. Text 19. My transcendental, I'm sorry, I think we're way over time. Is that right?
Yeah, we're like, oh, time now. It's already 7:50. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll stop right there. Are there any questions, comments, or
So
comments?
interesting. Today is the Guru Purnima.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So we have
And
to
then
go first.
specifically, exact purport that we ended up reading is about how to be a guru.
Yeah,
I don't know how to, what the instructions for
yeah,
being a guru.
absolutely.
Thank you so much, Maharaj. Very-
Yeah, it says first the father, spiritual master, or husband must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself in the ocean of reproachments, meaning criticism, for his unlawful activities. Everyone should be very responsible and take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple, or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. Well, that means you have to not only be Krishna conscious yourself, but you have to be able to teach your dependents to be Krishna conscious. Otherwise, you should not get married, you should not have children, you should not have dependents if you cannot save them from repeated birth and death. That means that we have to become really serious about Krishna consciousness. First, the father, spiritual master, or husband must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself in the ocean of reproachment, meaning he will be severely criticized for his unlawful activities. So, what are those unlawful activities? Not being able to teach your dependent to be Krishna conscious. It's not simply engaging in sense gratification, not being able to instruct your dependents on how to be Krishna conscious. Everyone should be very responsible and take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple, or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. Well, the only way you can do that is to teach your dependent to be completely engaged in Krishna conscious activities throughout their whole life. And you have to give the example, a good example of that, so that people have the example and therefore can follow properly the process of devotional service. Okay, we'll stop right there. Any questions or comments?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, I have a question.
Mhm.
In verse 16, Maharaj,
Yes,
in the first paragraph of the purport,
yes,
it says one who is
serious.
unintelligent.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah.
First paragraph of 5:16. Who has no eyes to see the future, simply creates enmity and fights with others for sense gratification. As a result, one suffers in the next life. Maharaj, sometimes maybe not for sense gratification, but there is issues between devotees as well regarding service. For example, or how to do service. If you see the Ritvik controversy or
What?
Ritvik
Okay.
controversy or what happened even with Gaudiya Math or even with the Prabhupada disciples. Sometimes there is disagreements or some fighting happening regarding service.
Mhm.
How should we think about that, Maharaj? Does that have the same repercussions as what is written here or is it different?
Well, there's two ways of being educated. Number one, following the person who is Krishna conscious. Number two, learning about those who are not Krishna conscious. So you're educated in both ways. You're educated by seeing the proper way to follow Krishna consciousness, and you're educated by seeing the wrong way of being Krishna conscious. So you avoid the wrong way and follow the right way. So you're being educated in two ways: to do the right thing and to avoid the bad thing. So therefore, you'll see throughout the Vedic literature, it explains the right way and the wrong way, so that we avoid going the wrong way and we stay always on the right way. If you never know what the wrong way is, you're not educated. And out of ignorance, you'll go the wrong way. So you have to learn both. Sometimes people say, oh, why did Prabhupada say this? Well, he's trying to educate us not to do the wrong way, but he can't do that unless he explains what the wrong way is. So he will explain what the wrong way is, and he'll also explain what the right way is to be Krishna conscious. And here, there are always going to be examples of people that go the wrong way, like the demons, right? And also explain how to go the right way. That's why it says here, due to ignorance, the materialistic person does not know anything about its real self-interest, the auspicious path. He doesn't know anything about the auspicious path. He is simply bound to material enjoyment by lusty desires, and all his plans are made for this purpose. For temporary sense gratification, such a person creates a society of envy. Oh my God. For temporary sense gratification, such a person creates a society of envy, and due to this mentality, he plunges into the ocean of suffering. Such a foolish person does not even know about this. In other words, doesn't even realize what he's doing. So, one who has no eyes to see the future is very significant in this verse. Life goes on from one body to another, and the activities performed in this life are enjoyed or suffered in the next life, if not later in this life. One who is unintelligent, who has no eyes to see the future, simply creates enmity, meaning hatred, and fights with others for sense gratification. So we really should not simply create enmity. That would be a big, big mistake. And fight with others for sense gratification. As a result, one suffers in the next life. But due to being like a blind man, he continues to act in such a way that he suffers unlimitedly. Such a person is a muda, one who simply wastes his time and does not understand the Lord's devotional service. And Krishna says, I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, I am covered by my eternal creative potency, Yoga Maya. And so the deluded world knows me not, who am unborn and infallible. Well, that's why there are people like Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada is a pure devotee, so he came to give an example of what it means to be a pure devotee. And not only that, he gave a practical example by his behavior how to be a pure devotee. And when devotees began to understand what Prabhupada was doing, he was giving an example of being a pure devotee, then they understood that here's a person I can follow because I can trust this person. He's very honest, he's very humble, and he is only talking about Krishna, nothing else. That was Prabhupada, only talking about Krishna. But also, helping devotees be cognizant of the wrong path. Unless you get both angles of vision, the right path and the wrong path, you can easily make mistakes in life. If you only hear about the right path and nothing about the wrong path, you could mistake the wrong path for being the right path. So you have to be educated in both the right path and the wrong path. And that's exactly what Prabhupada did. Some people say, oh, why is he talking about this? Oh, because you have to be cognizant of what the wrong path is. Otherwise, you could easily be cheated and go on the wrong path, or misled and go on the wrong path. Now, in this verse that is quoted, 7.25 in Bhagavad Gita, I am never manifest to the foolish and unintelligent. For them, I am covered by my eternal creative potency, Yogamaya. And so the deluded world knows me not, who am unborn and infallible. Now, someone could say, well, what? Why is he saying this? Well, you can't educate a person who is foolish and unintelligent. Very difficult. You have to teach them to control their mind and their senses. Therefore, the first thing that happens when you come in contact with devotees is give up illicit sex, meat eating, gambling, and intoxication. Otherwise, you cannot become a devotee. So there are rules in Krishna consciousness. Without giving up those four things, you can't be educated properly. Someone who continues to have illicit sex will not be educated properly because they have a strong attachment for sense gratification. So how do you know if that person has given up sense gratification? Well, you'll know very easily over time. Like there was this one devotee, a nice, very nice devotee, and a very good friend of mine. But and he is a fantastic uh, person who goes on Sankirtan. He's singing very nicely. He played the mridanga very nicely. And he's a very handsome person. And one time when we were on Sankirtan, he didn't come back. He didn't come back for a couple of days. So when he did come back, I said, where were you? He said, oh, I was teaching. I was preaching. Teaching and preaching. Right? I said, oh. I said, who were you preaching to? He said, oh, very nice person. I said, was this person a male or a female? He said, well, what does that matter? And what's important is I was preaching. I said, no, it does matter because you didn't come back for 2 or 3 days. So you were all that time you were preaching to someone. I want to know if that someone was a male or a female. He said, well, she was a female. So he got her pregnant. Of course, we didn't know that right away, but you could definitely guess that something like that would happen because he left the association of the devotees and spent a couple of days with this lady that he met on Sankirtan. So afterwards, he had a child, right? And the child was born with congenital, disease, a deformation of the body, right? It was very sad. And he never really supported the lady that he had sex with. And he never really, he tried to be helpful with the child, but the little boy was, born with a lot of material problems of the body. What do you expect? The the sex that he performed was all lust and greed, and it affected the quality of the child that was born. So that poor child, the whole life suffered. And his father, sometimes he took some interest in the child, but he never really completely, was there all the time to help the child. The child was severely born with what you call it, uh, physical problems. Okay, those are sad stories. All because he engaged in illicit sex. So today's takeaway. If one is ignorant and addicted to the path of samsara, how can one who is actually learned, merciful, and advanced in spiritual knowledge engage him in fruitive activities and thus further entangle him in material existence? If a blind mind is walking down the wrong path, how can a gentleman allow him to continue on his path, on his way to danger? How can he approve this method? No wise or kind man can allow this. So you might be a mother or father, but if you give a bad example, then how can you, be a mother or father if you give a bad example? Let's say if you're addicted to sex or addicted to smoking marijuana or addicted to drinking liquor, how can you teach your child to be a good person? It's not possible. Therefore, it says, if someone is ignorant and addicted to the path of samsara, meaning karma, repeated karma over and over, how can one who is actually learned, merciful, and advanced in spiritual knowledge engage him in fruitive activity and thus further entangle him in material existence? If a blind man is walking down the wrong path, how can a gentleman allow him to continue in his way to danger? How can he approve this method? No wise or kind man can allow this. Very beautiful verse. And there's no purport because the purport is in the verse. Yeah. Okay. It's a little bit late now. Thank you very much, my dear devotees. Are there any questions or comments? Okay, our takeaway for today.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Oh, okay. Yes, Hare Krishna.
Maharaj, one quick question. See, sometimes even though parents and they want to take care of their kids, but because of the circumstances, the living itself is a challenge sometimes in this material world. Lot of constant change, so many anxieties are going on. At the time, how to overcome? Because if you don't work, you cannot survive. If you work, you cannot escape the anxiety which is going on. Lot of uncertainty. Then in this scenario, what is the message you want to give to us, Maharaj?
Homeschool. Don't put the child in mundane schools. That'll save you a lot of headache. Now, some people say, no, but my child is doing okay. Yeah, maybe. But they're going to be definitely influenced by the bad association in the Karmi schools. So the best thing is to homeschool your child. And the best way to do that is to find other parents like yourself and have a group that homeschool their kids. That way you have a control on what they're learning, you have a control of who they're associating with, you have a control of their interests in life. So their interest in life is to watch television and uh, talk nonsense and learn all kinds of nonsense things in school. That is very bad. And who's to blame? Blame. It's the parents. So sometimes the parents say, "Well, my child got a very good education." Okay, is your child a devotee? Not really, but he is a good person. Well, you failed, right? Simply being so-called a good person is not enough. One has to be a genuine devotee to be a success in life.
Mhm.
Now, that doesn't mean you have to be rich. That doesn't mean you have to be famous. It means you have to be an honest devotee, who actually has faith in Krishna and practices Krishna consciousness seriously. It doesn't matter if he becomes a PhD or a prominent person in society. What's important is that the, the boy or the girl is taught to become a genuine devotee. So, therefore, it says everyone should be very responsible to take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple, or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged, honestly, unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and deaths.
I
That
think
is a
Maharaj,
big statement, yes.
I think Prabhuji's question, yes, for kids, I think what you said is right. He's talking about adults, I guess, Maharaj. If it's adults, to survive, you have to work. And if you go to work, there's anxiety. How do you handle in that case? I think is what.
Yes, Maharaj. Yeah, my question is little towards elderly people like us, people who are depending and with one source of income, and even that is also hard to manage sometimes.
Okay, so what is your question?
My question is like a lot of uncertainty is there now. Like a lot of wherever you see there is a negativity, like a layoff, and because of that, wherever we are working, there also the situation is becoming so toxic nowadays. You are constantly afraid. Hey, what's happening? How to go forward? If something, everybody are in vigilant. If something goes on, what is the situation next? We don't know. That is the situation we are there. A lot of uncertainty after, especially from past 6 months, the way things going on. The commitments are there. We cannot escape from commitments. That's the main thing because kids are studying, they are going to somewhere, or we need to maintain our thing. All the things going on, Maharaj. How to overcome, because sometimes you don't have a time to think, leave everything and just pack up and go back, or sometimes because we are not able to spend much quality time of Krishna consciousness. That's what I feel. Whenever you go to office, always this negativity, lot of talks goes on. uh, I'm feeling how I can overcome in these scenarios.
You can overcome all situations by going to sleep early and waking up early and being able to chant your rounds every day. 16 good rounds. Hare Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Krishna,
Krishna
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 Krishna,
Hare
Hare
Hare Ram,
Rama.
Rama
Hare
Hare Rama
Ram,
Rama 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 Hare.
That's number one.
Hare Bol.
Now there's number two and three and four also. But two, three, and four is not going to work very well unless number one is properly done. So you have to chant your rounds every day and without any disruption. In other words, it's not that you're trying to chant. I see people chanting their rounds. Like, let's say there's a program in the temple. So somebody is in the back of the temple and they have their hand in their bead bag and they're trying to chant their rounds. That's not chanting very well. You have to actually be regulated. I mean, Prabhupada was regulated. He would go to sleep around 8 o'clock at night and wake up 12 o'clock at night, and then uh, he would write his books and till 6 o'clock in the morning, and then he would have a full day of Krishna consciousness. So he was regulated. So we have to learn to become regulated. We might not be able to do exactly what Prabhupada did, but we should follow the principle of having a regulated life, doing the same thing at the same time every day. That means going to sleep at a particular time, early, and then waking up early, and then chanting your rounds, and ideally in the Brahma Muhurta period of the day, uh, early in the morning, very early in the morning. And then you can face the world because you chanted your rounds already. So if we can just do that, then everything else will fall into place. But if you can't chant your rounds every day nicely, you have you're in the back of the temple room with your hand in your bead bag chanting while there's a class going on. That's a very bad model. That means that you didn't go to sleep early, you didn't wake up early, you didn't chant all your rounds early, and now you're trying to chant your rounds listening to a class and standing in the back of the temple. That doesn't make sense. And those rounds are not really bona fide. So we have to be regulated. That's the first and foremost thing that you learn when you join Krishna consciousness. You have to have a regulated life. Eat at a certain time and go to sleep at a certain time, waking up at a certain time. All these things are necessary to have a flourishing spiritual life. But if you're unregulated, you can't have a flourishing spiritual life. You'll be always kicking the bucket down the road. It's a statement, it's a saying, kick the bucket down the road. In other words, you never really get regulated because you have no control of your mind and senses. So you kick the bucket down the road. You say, well, I'll do this tomorrow, or I'll do this next week, or I'll catch up, no. We have to be regulated. That way, we don't have to kick the bucket down the road. We are in control of our mind and senses, and therefore we're regulated every day to go to sleep early, wake up early, and chant our rounds nicely, and then face the world. Okay, so it says here, first the father, spiritual master or husband, must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself in the ocean of reproachment for his unlawful activities. So reproachment means going to be criticized by his own daughter or son. Everyone should be very responsible to take charge of his dependents, just as the spiritual master takes charge of his disciple, or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. So, if you're going to have children, you have to understand that you have huge responsibility. You can't just have the kids and go on your merrily in your way, not educating them properly. So it's a big responsibility to have children. It means for at least 25 years, you have to be able to instruct them, give them the right paragram or the right example, and to show your love and devotion for them so that they turn out to be a genuine devotee. It's a big responsibility. And uh, let's say you always are Krishna conscious, but you put your kid in a public school, and because of that, they become contaminated. But at least up until the age, let's say 12 years old, you had control of the child. Right? But then you lost control. But because the child did have that spiritual education for, let's say, 10 years or 12 years, it's very possible that they pick up when they're 30 years old what they learned when they were 10 years old. Right? It's very, very possible that that can happen. So we should never be hopeless. But there is going to be sometimes a period, a dangerous period, where the child gets under the bad influence. But that's due to the mistakes of the parents by putting the child in the Karmi schools. If the child is sequestered and only is associating with genuine devotees, then that is a much better situation for the child. The child is not being, uh, uh, open to nonsense people and nonsense teachers. But it's a big responsibility. Therefore, it says here, first the father, spiritual master or husband, must be able to release the dependent from repeated birth and death. If he cannot do this, he plunges himself into the ocean of reproachment, meaning being criticized severely for his unlawful activities. What were his unlawful activities? He didn't take the time to properly educate his kids. Everyone should be very responsible to take charge of his dependents, just as a spiritual master takes charge of his disciple or a father takes charge of his son. All these responsibilities cannot be discharged honestly unless one can save the dependent from repeated birth and death. And just imagine now how serious it is to have a child and the responsibility, the severe responsibility that goes with it. And you're always, I mean, your kid might be, 50 years old and you're 70 years old. He's still going to depend on you. Even though, you think, well, I'm 70 years old now, they'll leave me alone. No, 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 not necessarily. It's a dependency that you have to properly educate your child. You have to give the right example all the time. What is the right example? Like, for example, always bringing your child to the temple and making sure that he or she has good association in the temple and is learning the right things to do. And even more, let's say, perfectly, don't put the child in a mundane school where he comes into contact with mundane people, mundane teachers, and mundane uh, knowledge. Keep the child always in the association of devotees and educated by genuine devotees and learning genuine knowledge. So at first, you have to learn ABCD, and then once you know ABCD, you can read Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. The best education for a child is Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. That would take many, many years right there. But all knowledge is in those two books. So you have to think about these things seriously. Just like we're reading Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Now we're on Canto 5. There's 18, cantos. So it's a lifetime process. We can't just read one little thing and that's it. No. So this is what children should study. They should study Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, two greatest texts in the history of the universe. That's real education. Everything else is not really education, it's indoctrination to become a Sudra. They're indoctrinated to become a Sudra. Sudra is someone who depends on other people. But a devotee is independent. Why? Because he's learned to be Krishna conscious. Therefore, he doesn't have to have mundane knowledge. He has the highest knowledge, which is Krishna consciousness. And it teaches you to be independent from mundane life. The mundane life is a thing that destroys your ability to be Krishna conscious. Just eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And with no Krishna consciousness involved, then you're having a mundane life. And you'll never be able to get out of that cycle of mundane life without the association of genuine devotees. So, the parents should always put their children in the association of genuine devotees, not put their child in a school where everyone is a karmi and the teacher also is a karmi. That's a big mistake. How can they be educated properly in that type of culture? It's not possible. Okay, of course, nobody listens to this. They just go ahead and put their kids in the karmi schools. Prabhupada said those schools are slaughterhouses. It slaughters your desire to be Krishna conscious. Okay, thank you very much, my dear devotees. We're way over time. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Chant Hare Krishna and be happy. Now the real test is not only you are chanting Hare, but your kids are chanting Hare Krishna. That's the real test. Haribol. And meditate on that today.